Hi everyone, welcome. Good evening and welcome to Undeclared for Life on combining or smooshing many interests into one career. Tonight's event is put on by the Pomona Student Union, a nonpartisan student-run organization invested in raising the levels of honest and open dialogue on campus by bringing in speakers to talk on a variety of issues from a multiplicity of perspectives. One theme I've noticed about Claremont College's students is a really wide variety of interests. And I don't just mean that some students like art and some students like science. I mean that through my time here, I've met double majors in math and religious studies, physics and theater, philosophy, politics and economics, or PPE, and Russian literature. And now that I'm months away from graduating as a math major and a gender studies minor, I've noticed that a lot of my peers who have these really interesting double major combinations and also interests that are extracurricular that have nothing to do with what they're studying academically, we're all asking the same question, what passion do we follow now? Emily Wapnick refers to this phenomenon as multi-potentiality, a characteristic of people with many creative pursuits or interests. As she suggests, an uncommon solution. Rather than choosing one interest and forcing ourselves forward, or delaying the decision by going to graduate school, she suggests that we create our own careers, ones that incorporate all of our interests and have a flexibility to change along the way. Emily is the founder and creative director at puttylike.com, an online home for multi-potentialites. She is the author of Renaissance Business and is currently working at work on her second book, Multi-Potentialite. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
All right, so I want to start this off by asking you guys about a question. Can I just see a show of hands? Who here has ever been asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? At what age would you say you were first asked this question if you had to guess? You can just hold up fingers. 5, I'm getting a lot of 5, 7, 4, okay. Now, be honest. For who here does the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, maybe evoke some anxiety? So, I'm someone who's never been able to answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? See, the problem wasn't that I didn't have any interests, it's that I had too many interests. In high school, I liked English and math and art, and I played guitar and sang in a band, and I built websites. There were all these different things I was into. And since high school, after high school, I started to notice this pattern in myself where I would become really interested in a field, and I would dive in and become all consumed by this area, and I'd get pretty good, and then I would hit this point where I'd start to feel bored. And usually I would persist anyway because, I'd already devoted so much time and energy into this area and I didn't want to be a quitter. But eventually the boredom would get to be too much and I'd have to let it go. But then I would discover something new, something totally unrelated, and I would dive into that and I'd go full speed and I'd become all consumed by this new area. And eventually I would hit this point again where I'd start to get bored. But then I would dive into something else, something new and exciting, and I'd be like, yes, I found my thing. But sure enough, I would hit this point again. So this zigzagging about was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about many different subjects, but it caused me a lot of anxiety. So for one thing, I wasn't sure how I was going to turn any of this into a career. I saw my peers and they didn't have everything figured out, but they all seemed to be on a linear trajectory towards something, and I figured eventually I would have to just choose something, deny all of my other passions, and just kind of resign myself to being bored, which sounded awful. And the other reason that this caused me so much anxiety was just, it was a little bit more personal. I felt like maybe there was something wrong with this, and something wrong with me for being unable to stick with anything. I worried that I was afraid of commitment, or that I was self-sabotaging, afraid of my own success. I felt like I was the only one like this, like there was something wrong with me. So if this is resonating with you, I'd like you to ask yourself a question that I wish I'd asked myself back when I was going through all this. I'd like you to ask yourself where you learned to assign the meaning of wrong or abnormal to doing many things. The answer is that you learned it from the culture. So we're first asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, when we're about 5 years old? And the truth is that no one really cares what you say when you're that age, right? Like, it's this cute question that's posed to little kids to elicit these cute replies, like, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a fireman. You know, you can kind of imagine the Halloween costume. No one really cares what you say. But this question gets asked of us again and again in various forms as we get older, and for many of us, at some point, it goes from being the cute exercise it once was to the thing that keeps us up at night. Why? Well, it turns out there are a few implied norms in this question, a few things that are communicated in the subtext. The first is that it begins to condition us at a very young age to think about our careers from a place of discovery rather than design. So here's what I mean by that. We're taught that there are a set number of pre-existing job titles out there, and that we're supposed to take a look at our strengths and our passions and fit ourselves into one of these pre-existing categories. The alternative to that would be to say, what kind of life do I want to create, and how can I make that happen? Totally different starting point. The second thing that the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, does is it implies the idea of a monodestiny. So when someone asks you this question, you can't really reply with 20 different things. You know, the well-meaning adult will probably chuckle and be like, oh, that's so cute, but you can't be a marine biologist and an art curator. You have to choose. So at a very young age, we're introduced to the idea that you can only do one thing. But it goes beyond that. It's this notion of the one true calling and, you know, that romantic idea of destiny, right? Like that we all have one thing we were placed on this earth to do. But if you're someone who isn't wired this way, and you have a lot of different interests and a lot of things you want to do, there's no real room for you in this framework, in this question of what do you want to be when you grow up. Things weren't always this way. So you guys probably know this, but back in Renaissance times, being well-versed in multiple disciplines was considered the ideal. You were supposed to develop your mind in all areas: science, the arts, philosophy, history, politics. They believed that humans were limitless in their ability to grow and evolve. Our modern culture of specialization really stems historically from the Industrial Revolution. Because back then, you know, division of labor, efficiency, everyone needed to be a cog in the system because that is how our industry flourished. And then that model got brought into the school systems, and now it's like a kid shows interest, you kind of shepherd them down a narrow field, and then when they graduate, they can perfectly fill a niche at a company. That's what the whole model was built on. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's nothing inherent or biological about like doing one thing. You know, it's entirely culturally based. So there's something wrong with you. Okay. What is a multi-potentialite? Let's define the term. A multi-potentialite is someone with many interests and creative pursuits in life. It comes from the term multi-potentiality, which is a real word. Multi-potentialite is not yet. I hope for it to one day be in the dictionary. But, it's a term so multi-potentiality is a term in psychology used to refer to some gifted and talented students who display aptitudes in multiple areas. And some other terms you might be familiar with: polymath, Renaissance person, generalist. Barbara Scher wrote a book called Refuse to Choose, and she refers to us as scanners. And then multipod is kind of a shortened version, because some people find multi-potentialite a little hard to say. I don't know why. This is the definition from the academic literature. Multi-potentiality is the ability to select and develop any number of career options because of a wide variety of interests, aptitudes, and abilities. A lot of people ask me whether I think multi-potentialites are born that way or whether we become multi-potentialites. I don't have any science to back this up, but my sense is that if you observe a little kid, they're curious about everything. Little kids don't have specialties, right? So I think that we all start out this way and it gets dumped out of us at a certain point. Multi-potentialites exist on a spectrum of sequential to simultaneous. So on the sequential side of things, you've got someone who likes to do one thing for a period of time, months, years, many years, and then changes and works in entirely different fields, and they just do that one thing. And then on the other end, we've got the simultaneous multi-potentialite, and this is someone who likes to do a variety of things at one time. You know, someone who really thrives in an environment where they have many different projects, maybe they work with a lot of different teams, and it's a spectrum, so most of us are somewhere in the middle. Let's talk about trajectories. So let's say you have a kid in high school who's interested in science. Maybe in college they study biology, do kind of the pre-med track, and then they go to medical school, do the residency, and then they become a doctor. Let's say, in the arts, you've got someone who's studying music in college. We assume they're going to be a musician or a music teacher. If there's someone in engineering school, we assume they're going to be an engineer. If you have someone in law school, we assume they're going to be a lawyer. There are these fields with associated careers. And what a specialist will do, someone who's wired that way, is they'll just go straight down one of these paths to the associated career. Multi-potentialites, however, move both vertically and laterally, and they take their skills and apply them not just in service of the associated career, but sometimes in unexpected ways. So I'll take myself as an example. These are the four main areas that I studied formally in school. The bottom is the field, and the top is the associated career, or at least the one that I was considering. I could have gone straight down any one of these paths, except that I couldn't. I tried. My path looked a little bit more like this. But see, now I have this message that I care about sharing, that you can do many things, there are lots of people out there making it work. And when I launched this project, I needed a website. Well, because I'd done freelance web design for many years, I was able to build my own website. I didn't need to spend thousands of dollars and hire someone else to do that. I also wanted to register my business and my trademark, and because I'd gone to law school, I could kind of navigate the procedural aspects of that. I'd taken intellectual property law, I had a sense of whether my name would be accepted as a trademark. I didn't need to hire a lawyer. I did a podcast for a while, and because of the nights that I spent up in my room writing and recording songs as a teenager, I knew how to get a decent sound out of a little USB mic, and I was able to edit the audio files really quickly. Occasionally I make videos, and because of things that I picked up in first year at film school, like the rule of thirds and basic lighting techniques, I know how to get a decent looking video from my laptop or from my phone. So I'm not using my music skills in service of being a musician. I'm not using my art skills in service of being an artist or web designer. I'm not using my film skills in service of being a filmmaker, and I'm not using my legal skills in service of being a lawyer. I'm using them all in service of something else, what I call the group hug project, because it's a group hug of my many interests. So specialists usually apply skills vertically. Multi-potentialites do sometimes, but we also sometimes apply them in other fields in unconventional ways. So if you're interested, if you study something for a while and then you quit, you let it go, that doesn't mean that you didn't pick up a ton of useful knowledge and skills that you just might, you might apply them, just not in the way that you thought you might originally. Okay, so we talked about the Renaissance period, we talked about the Industrial Revolution. Things are changing. This is a really exciting time to be a multi-potentialite. However, there are still certain challenges that we face. Things like the work question. How are you going to get variety into your work and also make a living? There's the productivity issue. How are you going to make progress on all of these different projects when you have so much on your plate? And then there's a real confidence issue for a lot of people who grow up feeling like there's something wrong with them, like they don't have a purpose. So a lot of people need to deal with that, and the feeling that you're the only one like this, like you're alone. So I have to deal with those. And there's a lack of resources right now. There are some really good guidance counselors out there, but for the most part, if a high school student goes to see a guidance counselor, what will probably happen is they'll take a career assessment test, they'll rank high in multiple areas, and then the advisor will be like, oh great, you're good at a lot of different things, now let's choose one. And that's not the kind of help that multi-potentialites need. They need someone who's going to help them maybe pair together two complementary careers or look at interdisciplinary fields, someone who understands their plural nature and isn't going to try and force them into a box. Also, a lot of the career books out there right now are really oriented around helping you find your thing, the singular. Okay. So before we get to the how-to part, I really want to talk about why your multi-potentiality is a good thing. And not just like it's going to lead to a rich life, make you happy, but why it's going to be the thing that makes you financially successful in the 21st century. This is a quote from a book called A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink. Here it's, what's the most prevalent and perhaps most important prefix of our times? Multi. Our jobs require multitasking, our communities are multicultural, our entertainment is multimedia. While detailed knowledge of a single area once guaranteed success, today the top rewards go to those who can operate with equal aplomb in starkly different realms. I call these people boundary crossers. This is a really interesting book. In A Whole New Mind, Daniel Pink talks about how the 20th century could really be defined by left-brain thinking. It was people who could think sequentially, literally, functionally, textually, and analytically. These were the people who were most in demand. But now the 21st century, it's really going to be the right-brain thinkers who are most in demand. People who can think simultaneously, have a good sense of metaphor, aesthetics, design, can see problems in their larger context and look at things synthetically. And he credits this to three factors. So the first is abundance, so just products being widely available and companies having to innovate and think about design and aesthetic just to stand out. He also talks about outsourcing, so a lot of these jobs, with left-brain jobs, are going abroad. And then automation, a lot of them are being replaced, computers are taking over. So yeah, so it's looking pretty good so far for the multi-potentialite in the 21st century. This is a quote from a designer named Clement Mock. The next 10 years will require people to think and work across boundaries into new zones that are totally different from their areas of expertise. They will not only have to cross those boundaries, but they will also have to identify opportunities and make connections between them. In February of 2012, Fast Company published a series of articles on what they call generation flux. And they made the point that if you look at the last 10 years of business and you try and come up with a pattern, there really isn't one. It's chaos. Companies rise and companies fall, and there's no real rhyme or reason to it. And so the best way to survive and indeed thrive in this kind of environment is to develop the ability to be flexible, to take what's thrown at you, to change roles, to learn new things, to be adaptable. Here are a few examples of what I would call generation fluxers, or whatever they called them. So this is Toby Mattingly. Toby, growing up, she was interested in theater and performing arts, but she was also a classic multi-potentialite, had a lot of different interests. Now, as an adult, Toby, she knew that trying to make it as an actor would be difficult, but she also didn't want to be just an actor. She wanted to do a lot of different things. So the last time we got together, she was the musical director for 2 different shows. She owns a photography business where she takes headshots of actors. She does some copy editing and web design work. She has a consulting service where she helps artists with their careers, and she teaches Shivanata, which is kind of like Tai Chi. So she diversifies her income stream, and she gets a ton of variety. Ethan Waldman quit his corporate job 2 years ago, and with his free time, he spent a year building a tiny house, which he now lives in. It's really cool. I saw it when I was in Vermont. And now that his house is built, he uses his free time to work on his online business, which is called Cloud Coach, where he helps people be better with technology. Lauren Sadler is originally from the UK. She's traveling right now. She sent me this photo from somewhere in Asia. And I'm just going to read you a quote that this is a comment she left on Putty Like on the blog. She writes, "I was at my last full-time job for 6 years, and in that time I was a graphics designer, web designer, art designer for print, web administrator, online marketer, general manager, photographer, SEOer, data analyzer, project manager, technical support, customer support, copywriter, proofreader, blogger, business development strategist, and sales manager." Let's talk about the relationship between multi-potentiality and innovation, because most multi-potentialites are pretty creative, and I think that there's something going on there. So we'll look at a few examples of innovation throughout history, and then some more modern examples. So the Wright brothers were not engineers, they weren't physicists, they worked at a bicycle shop. And they took principles from their trade and ideas around balance, and they used them to build the first functional aircraft. George de Mestral invented Velcro after going on a hike with his dog and observing how the burrs stuck to his dog's fur. Kepler drew on his knowledge of light and magnetism to explain how the planets revolve around the sun. In art, we've got Cubism, which is a blend of Western and African art. The arts and crafts movement in architecture and furniture and design drew heavily on medieval influences, and William Morris, one of the founders of the movement, actually wrote fantasy novels, and he wrote essays and poetry and translated ancient and medieval texts. Hip-hop is a blend of jazz, poetry, politics, and technology. A friend of mine was telling me about an occupational therapist she knows who had a patient who was having trouble walking. And so together they went to a hardware store, and he helped her pick out supplies that they would need, and they built a device that would help her walk better. That's not something he learned how to do in occupational therapy school. It was knowledge from a past life in construction, or maybe just a side hobby, but he took knowledge from a completely unrelated field, brought it into his practice, and it made him a more effective occupational therapist. Tim Manley is a high school teacher at a public school in New York City. He's also a comedian and has performed in an improv troupe for many years. And Tim totally uses his knowledge of comedy in the classroom, and he uses it to kind of set up a fun environment, better connect with his students. So this is what I think is going on. I believe that innovation happens at the intersections of multiple disciplines. I think you could actually define innovation as taking knowledge from one area and using it to solve a problem in a totally unrelated field. That's where the new ideas come from. They don't come from the textbooks. Steve Jobs once said that creativity is just connecting things. Well, multi-potentialites have a lot of dots to connect. We have a lot of different areas to draw from, and that means a lot of potential points of intersection. A lot of people experience a moment of relief when they learn that they're a multi-potentialite and that it's okay to be this way. But that relief is often then followed by a question, which goes something like, okay, awesome, I'm a multi-potentialite, but now how do I make a living? So that's what I want to talk about now. What's the ideal career for a multi-potentialite? Unfortunately, there's no one ideal career. I can't just say, go become an architect, because architecture is an interdisciplinary field. It'll let you blend together your interests in science with your interests in art. It doesn't work that way. That'll work for some people, but not for everyone. We all have different interests, and we all have different ways in which we like to work. However, I've met and spoken to many happy and successful multi-potentialites in all different fields. And there seem to be two components that are there in every case. The first is that they have work that provides them with sufficient variety. And it might not surprise you to hear that multi-potentialites need variety, but it's about getting that right amount. So if you have too little, you'll feel bored, you'll feel like you're not getting to express the breadth of who you are. Too much variety and you'll feel scattered and overwhelmed, you'll feel like you're not making progress on your various projects. And the amount that we require, it's different for everyone. So you need to kind of experiment and figure out how much is right for you. And the other really important ingredient is meaning. You know, I mean, this is important for everyone, whether they're a multi-potentialite or not. You need to feel like you're contributing something, like you're making a difference somehow. You don't need to be working on the cure for cancer, but you need to feel like you're making someone's life better. What we don't want is a life where you get to do a whole bunch of random odd jobs and you don't care about any of them, and you're just doing busy work. That's not what we want. So the question is, how are you going to get the variety and the meaning that you require into your life and your work? I'm going to go over 4 work models that are commonly used by multi-potentialites. A couple words before I start though. So most of the people that I've spoken to and interviewed about this are hybrids. They're, they could fit into multiple models, or they've moved between them. So don't feel like you need to pick one of these and stick with it. It's a common theme you'll see throughout this. And then I tried to include examples of both traditional employment and self-employment options within each of these models. We all know that the economy sucks right now and that it's hard to find a job, let alone a dream job. And I feel as though self-employment, creative self-employment, is a really viable way around this, and I don't think enough people are talking about it. So I tried to include some examples of both traditional careers and also some self-employed artists, some freelancers, some small business owners. So the first work model that is commonly used by multi-potentialites is what I call the group hug approach. And this is where you take 2 or more subjects and you bring them together, you smush them together in one multifaceted job or business. Sarah Meister is a teacher in Providence, Rhode Island. And being an educator is a pretty multifaceted career. You have to be a counselor sometimes, you have to be a facilitator, you have to be a performer sometimes. You need to understand different learning styles, different personality types, different challenges your students might be going through. You need to stay up to date on education policy, on your subject matter. There's a lot that goes into it. And for some people, this might be enough variety. But for others, maybe not. Like I said, we each require different amounts of variety to stay happy. So Sarah Meister is a teacher at a Waldorf school, which is a very different philosophy. And I asked her if she could describe what the day looked like, and she sent me this, so I'm just going to read from it. The main curricular piece of the day is called Main Lesson. This is a 2-hour block of study, first thing Monday to Friday. It begins with morning circle, movement, games, verses, songs, recorder playing, alliteration, beanbag toss, modeling, figure drawing, mental math, spelling, you name it. Then the previous day's lesson is reviewed orally or via an activity. Then a story is told with the new day's content. In early grades, the story is 20 minutes or so. In later grades, the story is 45 minutes and up. Lastly, the children work with the previous day's lesson or this day's lesson in an artistic/creative way. This might look like a group authoring a play, painting a picture, writing a summary, modeling a map of Africa from clay, etc. The emphasis is on hands-on and exploratory learning. The teacher is the world. They bring the world to the students via the lessons they teach. They emphasize truth, beauty, and goodness. And she mentions that critical thinking begins in middle school classrooms. So obviously a very different philosophy, one where the teacher has a lot more freedom, they can be more creative, bring in their other ideas and interests. But I use education as an example, but this is true of most fields. In most fields, there are organizations and branches that are more interdisciplinary than others. So if you're considering a particular area, you might look for one of those. This is a coffee shop / bike shop / community space in Minneapolis. You might say that running a coffee shop provides a lot of variety and is multifaceted. Well, apparently not enough for some people. So this is what I call a renaissance business because they don't just do one, it's not like a niche, they don't build faucets or just sell bikes. It's a few different things going on in one space. Say you're interested in psychology and you also love to surf. Well, you could be a therapist and surf on the weekends, or you could do this. Ocean therapy is an emerging movement where it's basically therapy that takes place on surfboards while learning to surf. Okay. The first work model, the group hug approach, we're bringing things together. The second work model is the slash approach, and this is where we keep things separate. And this can mean, having multiple jobs at one time. It can mean having multiple businesses or offerings, different revenue streams. We just had a therapy example, so here's another one. Dr. Bob Childs is a psychotherapist slash luthier, and he has a house in Massachusetts where on the first floor he's got his therapy office, and upstairs he's got his violin making shop. And he could have said, okay, I'm interested in psychology and in art or music. I could just do music therapy, but he didn't want to. He wanted to keep them separate, and that's a totally viable way of doing things too. Allison May is a hairdresser slash daycare teacher slash performance artist slash sculptor. She makes sculptures out of wood. They're really nice. She was my hairdresser when I lived in Portland, and I always loved going to see her because she would tell me about the various projects she was working on, and I'm sure that they sometimes impacted each other and blended together, but for the most part they were pretty distinct and separate, and she just kind of cycles through them over the course of her week. The third work model that's commonly used by multi-potentialites is what I call the Einstein approach. Albert Einstein worked at the patent office, and he filed patents, and this was a notoriously slow-paced job. But he was basically hired by the government, and he had a lot of stability, he was well compensated, but most importantly, this job allowed him with enough free time and creative energy to work on his theories outside of work, and even during work, because he could just kind of sit there and imagine things. So some authors call this the good enough job, but it's basically just what I said, having a stable job that provides you with an ability to pay the bills and be comfortable, and exploring your other interests when you're not at work. So this isn't a job that makes you work 100 hours a week. That's not what we're talking about. Rami Nasir he's the marketing director at a tech company in Montreal, and it's a pretty standard 9-to-5 job. He doesn't, it's not his dream job, but he likes it well enough. He likes the people he works with. He likes having a place to go, and he's well compensated. He gets paid very well. And then when he's not at work, he does things like playing the harp. He is a big video game guy. He's like #1 in some fighting game in Canada called Tekken. He was telling me about it. I was like, okay. He writes a blog called Gutsy Geek, where he helps geeks be kind of less socially awkward and build their confidence and stuff. And he wrote a book last year too. Linda Bain works at a medical clinic in Portland, Oregon that caters to low-income patients, and she finds her work very fulfilling, but she also has a love of animals, and so she has a dog training business, and she teaches puppy training classes one night a week at a local community college. She's also a writer, and she's done NaNoWriMo now for like the last 10 years, which is you write a book in a month, so she's written several novels, and many short stories too. And she's got a bunch of random interests like kayaking and hiking and horseback riding. Okay, and the fourth commonly used work model is the serial approach. This is where you work in one field for a period of time, 5-10 years, until you feel like you're not challenged anymore, like you start to get bored, and then you transition to an entirely new field, and you just do that for a while. This is obviously an approach that's best suited for someone who's more sequentially oriented. Jonathan Fields was once a lawyer, and after being a lawyer for many years, he decided to stop doing that and to open a yoga studio. Did that for many years, and then he sold his business and became a business consultant. After that, he published a book, and then he published another book. And now he hosts a show on his website called The Good Life Project, where he interviews other artists and creatives. Lori Stalter was a restaurant manager at an Italian restaurant, and then she started taking some accounting classes and transitioned and worked as a bookkeeper in the automobile industry. Then she became interested in drafting, and she moved to engineering and started working at an engineering firm, and then she moved over to architecture. So you do things in sequence, but this approach isn't great for someone who needs to be dabbling in many different fields at one time. Okay. So here they are, and remember that you can mix and match or move between them. You can try one out for a few years and then try another one out, whatever works for you. Where to start? Okay, so I included a URL at the end of this, where you can go get these slides. So don't feel like you need to take a bunch of notes. I see that most of you aren't taking notes anyway, so that's fine. But here are some ways that you could get started. Okay. So first, you want to put together a master list of your various interests, skills, passions, curiosities. Include everything, past and present. If you're not sure whether to include something, include it. Even if it's something fleeting, even if it's something that you've just recently become interested that you don't know much about, you want to get everything out on paper. This is like a brain dump. Next, you're going to refine this list a little bit. So cross out anything that you're totally over, that you don't want to go near with a 10-foot pole. Just get rid of those. And put stars next to the ones that sound really exciting to you right now. Next, you're going to brainstorm. So try to fit the various things on your list within the 4 different work models. For the group hug approach, are there any of them that you could smush together that would go well together? Or maybe even try smushing together some really random interests. You might come up with some weird job ideas, but who knows? I mean, surfing and psychology, they're pretty different. For the slash approach, you could just make a list of as many different jobs and products and service ideas that you can think of. For the Einstein approach, you would want to say, are any of these, could any of these provide a stable job that would allow me with some free time? And then for the serial approach, you could do an exercise where you say, if I had 8 parallel lifetimes, what would I do in each of them? And that's kind of a fun exercise too. And then, this is all theoretical, so you really need to get out there and experiment and try some of this out, and you'll learn more about yourself as you start exploring, and you'll refine your approach, and you'll get closer to getting that variety and that meaning that you need. Okay, so why am I up here talking about this with you guys? So I care so much about sharing this message that you can do many things, that there are lots of people making it work, because I believe that we should all be who we are, and that we should have lives and careers that are aligned with how we're wired. But, so I do it because I want you to be happy, I want you to get to explore all of your different interests, but I also truly believe that multi-potentialites are the innovators of the future. And by denying this side of yourself and trying to fit yourself into a specialist box, you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting the rest of us. So go out there and explore your interests and have some fun with it and smush some things together, explore the intersections. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for having me.
So now we're up to the Q&A portion of our event, but before, if you guys have to run, before you run, I wanted to let you guys know that tomorrow we're actually going to be hosting a workshop with Emily that is for 5C students. I think it's going to be held in SCC 217, so upstairs on the second floor somewhere, but we do need people to sign up because it's capped at 10, so we'll have a list in the back where you can put down your name and email address if you're interested. But yeah, so questions? Yes?
Hey, can everybody hear me? Is this good? Okay, cool. So at the beginning you talked a little bit about the sliding scale between a simultaneous and a sequential multipotentialite, and I'm thinking of the stereotypical midlife crisis and all of these things. So I'm wondering if there's also a sliding scale not only within multipotentialites, but between multipotentialites and, if you want to call them monopotentialites, that sounds a little mean, but between those two.
Monopaths.
Yes, monopaths.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't say this, but I actually feel like the distinction between multipotentialite and specialist is a little artificial. I think that because of the way society's been set up, it sort of is real, functionally speaking. But I think that often specialists look like specialists, but their specialty is actually a blend of multiple subjects, and it's something really specific because they've combined a few different things. Does that make sense? So I'm not sure if it's a spectrum or if the whole thing is, there just is no such thing as one or the other. I think that it's helpful to have a title like multipotentialite because so many people feel like lost, like there's some, so it's kind of empowering. But yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does. Thanks.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestion how to maybe to not feel like you're watering down all of your interests, or maybe not feeling so ADD about them?
Yeah. So I always have my priority projects that I'm working on right now, and then a huge back burner list. So I would say work on a few, there's a middle ground between doing just one thing at a time and doing everything at that one time. So maybe have 2 or 3 things that you're focusing on, and I always keep reminders for myself, what my main focuses are right now, and I'll hang them on my wall. But I also give myself dabbling time, where I set a timer for 40 minutes sometimes, and I'm okay, I can just do whatever I want and explore and just go down the rabbit hole. But I'd say that, yeah, maybe you've got a little bit too much variety right now if you're feeling scattered, but that is a really common thing. Yes?
What do you suggest for people who are met with pressure from outside to sort of focus their interests and their efforts and stuff like that? Even though they may know, they may have already gotten to the point where, hey, I am what I am, I'm good with it, but how do you convince the rest of the world in a way that's actually meaningful?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. I get that question a lot. I mean, you can explain to them what a multipotentialite is. You can send them to Putty if you want. Sometimes people just don't want to hear it, and you just need to live your life, and hopefully they'll see that you're happy and that you're making it work, and they'll come around. We can give them a copy of Barbara Scher's book, Refuse to Choose.
But when it's, I had a friend right now who's trying to look for work. She just lost her job. Her resume is
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like it belongs to 10 people.
And so what she's coming up against is actual objections from employers where she knows that she would be a huge asset to them. Just get to see it.
So one strategy that is often used involves using one particular skill set to get in the door. And then once if you try and find an organization that's a bit more open-minded and might be willing to listen to your ideas. And once you're in the door, you show them what else you could do. You propose things and other different initiatives that would allow you to bring in your other skills. A lot of people do this. I worked as a summer student at a legal clinic one summer, and I got hired to I spent the first month doing legal research and writing legal memos. But then my boss, who was pretty cool, he learned somehow that I knew how to do flash animation, which is totally defunct art right now. It's flash art. But I found myself making these animations to explain concepts in copyright law, users' rights and fair use and stuff to the public. And I was making these animations, and then I got to do some graphic design. So if your friend can maybe emphasize one skill set just to get in the door, and then
demonstrate how the additional skill sets and interests can make her go further in the role.
Yeah, or even just not framing it oh, I could use this skill, instead just being here's a project idea, and then oh, I can do that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Well, speaking to that same thing, something that I found helpful is having multiple resumes. like kind of customizing it to add jobs, so you focus on more on like one set of skills with maybe a few other relevant ones, just so it doesn't look so scattered. Like everything that you've ever done doesn't have to go on the seconds.
Very true. Though I did get an email from someone recently who said that she went for a job interview, and she mentioned she'd written a guest post for Putty Leg, and the employer asked about that, and so she started talking about what a multi-potentialite is, and he was like, "Oh my god, I think I'm a multi," and then they just had this whole conversation, and she got the job. Yeah.
Could you discuss like maybe the success rate of the examples you listed a little bit? Because I know there's sort of an idea that multipotentiality, it's a toss-up. If you choose multipotentiality or to pursue that, it's choosing between living a comfortable life and living and scraping by.
Yeah, I tried to debunk that myth. The people that I included are all quite, like, I made sure to just choose people who are really financially good, you know. So yeah, I think that idea is not valid, especially these days. Maybe in the past, but there are some really successful multi-potentialites out there. I mean, if you just look in the media, there are people like really prominent names like Oprah and like Richard Branson and like James Franco. Like these people do a lot of different things and have a lot of projects in different areas.
Stuff with Marlon making it hard. I just realized that a couple days ago, watching him on TV. So much now.
Anything else? Anyone? Yeah.
I know, like, I personally like doing a lot of different things, but how do you sort of know that when you're pursuing something, it's like not going to lead anywhere? Like you said, like you might like something a lot and you put in a lot of effort, but at the end of the day, you're just not that good at it. So how do you know when to? Like,
Yeah. So I don't know if you can necessarily know that beforehand, but if you go into it with the expectation that this is going to be like your life's calling, then you might end up being disappointed. But if you go into it being like, there's something about this area that's drawing me to it, I'm going to learn something, that, you know, I want to explore it further, and you go in with the idea that you kind of want to acquire some skills, acquire some knowledge, develop your mind, then that can make it easier to when you lose interest. Also, yeah, remember that like even if you're not doing something now, it might still have an impact somewhere else. So I don't know if you've seen Steve Jobs' Stanford address, but he talks about how he snuck into a calligraphy class and how years later that one calligraphy class was the inspiration for the beautiful typeface of the Apple computer. So you never know. All right. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Emily. Have a great evening, guys. Our next talk, actually, I should give a shout out, is going to be on April 1st. It's next Wednesday. It's about the socialization of minority students at Pomona College. And I don't remember where it is, but you can find it on Facebook. Thanks, guys.